childhood up, we have had to conform to a certain social game. And so we're in a constant state of competition. Good assistance, secret. You can't make a mistake.
Welcome, everybody, to Friends of Failure. I'm your host, Sam, and this is my co-host, Megan.
Heyo.
I am super excited to introduce you to Diana Morris. How you doing?
I'm doing well. How are you both doing today?
Doing great.
Better now.
It's a wonderful, now that we're here, right? The moment that I've been waiting for, right? The weather's been gorgeous outside, so I've been really just embracing it. I don't know how much you know about the cold, but here in Texas, it gets down to like 40 degrees sometimes, you know?
Well, yeah, I'm over in Brooklyn, New York, so we're there. We're slowly rising in the temperature, which has been lovely to see everyone out and about because it's been cold.
Yeah, the lowest it gets in New York, though, is like 50 degrees, right? I mean, stays pretty warm all year round, right? It's like Hawaii, but...
Pretty basic, pretty temperate, you know, the usual.
Nothing extreme, nothing locking you inside.
My ties by the beach all the time. Yeah. Super excited to have you here. Before we really dive into conversation, I would love to kind of hear just a little bit about yourself. Like, what do you do? What are you about, you know?
Absolutely. So I am a clarity coach who essentially helps individuals make the most of the life they've been gifted, specifically by helping them make decisions or find clarity in any area of their life that is most meaningful, right? A lot of times we follow this path of what we quote unquote should do. So we get the degree, we find the person, we get the job, we have 2.5 kids, maybe a dog, white picket fence, stay at the job, eventually retire, and that's when we live. I got tired saying that. I know a lot of people get tired living that. So my role and my mission is really to help people make the most of the one precious life they have by helping them identify, what do you actually want for yourself? Why do you want this thing? And how can you bring together all of the experiences you already have, all of the resources at your disposal to make it a reality? So that is the succinct way of putting it together for you all.
Yeah.
Now everybody knows why I'm so excited about introducing you and doing this, right?
Because all their minds just exploded. Yeah.
Right. There's a such thing as a clarity coach, and it's like, yeah, man. Which, a couple of questions right out the gate is, the first one would be, are there similarities to when people are like life coaches? Mm-hmm. I assume maybe they have similarities, or it's not the same thing, right?
So it is very similar, right? And I don't think it's the same thing, because when I look at life coaching, it's really, you're going with, a specific area that you want to focus in on, right? You kind of have this idea of what things should look like for you, and you want someone to help guide you along the way. When I speak about clarity, it's understanding, why do you want that specific thing, right? If your job is ruining your life and you can't stand what you're doing, why don't you like it? Let's get to the core of what's going on. Otherwise, you're just putting Band-Aids on an issue that actually might need surgery. You know what I mean? So really identifying the deep underlying issue so that you can be clear and have a specific roadmap that you want to follow, that you've defined for yourself to move forward with.
That's so awesome. Because you're right. If you don't know why you hate the job and you break up with that job and go start another job, oh, wait a minute, how did I end up in the exact same spot? Yeah. Right. So the next question would be, did you have like this epiphany and you were like, this is what I was meant to do? Or did you see something? Like, what took you down this path?
A little bit of that. Yeah, kind of. It was a moment of, I do this. So my background, my official training is in higher education. So I spent nearly a decade working in colleges and universities, and everything, starting as a student leader, orientation leader. I was one of those peppy people welcoming you to campus, all the way up to my
waving, right?
Yeah, exactly. My little sign, all the way up to my most recent role in student conduct. So essentially what I would do at these places, I would help students make the most of their college experience. Specifically looking at, okay, let's talk about Friday night. What was going on with your decision-making? What was going on there? So in that realm of my professional world, Then alongside that, my personal life, where people would just come to me for advice. They know that I was objective. They know I was logical. I could help them cut out the fluff and just get to the core of like, what do you actually want from this situation, right? If you text this person, what do you want to happen? Let's think about all the possibilities. If you apply to this job, what are you looking to gain? Let's look at all the possibilities. And then I realized that I didn't just want to keep it to the people who knew me. I didn't want to keep it to my friends, family, or the students I happen to work with, because this is a universal thing that people can be supported with. So I made it into a business, a side hustle, as they call it, and then really refined it, worked with my own coaches to figure out, okay, how do I succinctly explain what I do? And that's where the Clarity Coach title came in. And this is what I do full time now, is help people with these conversations and decisions and next steps.
Love it.
Yeah.
I assume this isn't strictly just New York, right? Like I'm assuming you can do this period, right? Like anywhere, as long as you have like a connection.
Zoom is my best friend, so I work with people across the globe all times and all days. So yeah,
just need Wi-Fi.
That's pretty.
Yeah.
Well, and the reason I asked is because I'm sure there are people that, well, okay, so like the three of us, I'm sure we've come across information before and went, that's a game changer. Like, why didn't I know this before? And then it's like, hey, I want to do that, right? Like, Clarity Coach is a thing. I need that. I want that. People obviously can like stumble across you, be referred to you, find you in some form or fashion. But has it gotten to that point for you where, I mean, it's like, hey man, I'm in Europe, but can you help me out? And then of course you're like, do you have Zoom?
Yeah, so I've had conversations with people all the way in Australia about what this could look like for them. And some things that are interesting when I do work with people outside of the States is, a lot of my work is grounded in the stories we tell ourselves about what's possible, required, and optional for our life. And America specifically has specific stories we tell ourselves about what's required, optional, and possible for our life. So it's interesting, those conversations when I'm speaking to someone with a completely different cultural upbringing, what their stories look like. So I have had conversations with people, they come to my workshops, they are able to get something because it just highlights that it's a universal truth. It doesn't matter where you live, there are certain things that you need to navigate. So in that regard, it's been really interesting that Zoom can connect us in more ways than one to help you realize that there are options and there are other possibilities for you.
Yeah. And I like how you mentioned that, like, it can be different depending on your structure, the society you live in, kind of that stuff. But what you keep finding out over and over again, we're all human. We all just, want some happiness at the end of this life or during it and in the middle, and you're finding that common thread of how we all are linked by that a little bit. And I'm sure that's helped you not just be a clarity coach, but find clarity in your job, which is just inception a little too. Yeah. But has going through this journey like brought back some reflection on you as well too?
Absolutely. Like every day I feel like I'm learning things and I'm just dropping it on my Instagram stories. So like, I had this thought as I looked at a leaf. Did you think about like those are real moments that have happened. And I think it's a testament to the fact that I don't think we ever stop learning, right? There's no one who has it figured out. If anyone tells you they have it figured out, they are not telling you the truth. And you should be very wary, right? Because each day we're going to get new information. We're going to have to make different choices. We're going to be confronted with new things about what we thought, what we knew, yada, yada, yada. So for me, it's exciting because I just get to talk to people all the time. I get in their business and then we, go away and then I know that they move forward in a way that is more reflective of what they want it to be. And I'm just one part of their overall story. So that's exciting for me because then they're a part of mine and then the cycle of life continues on. So
yeah.
There it is.
We both very much like enjoy the connection that we get through the podcast, so we can kind of relate there. And then even though it is just a touch point, you said before you even started this, you were that friend. Like everyone has a friend in their group that they're the person you go to when like shit's getting real and they need someone to be like, hey, you're being a little crazy, or you're not thinking about this, or whatever it is, and they help sort through it. But you found your gift and now you're applying it to the world. And I think that's kind of in some way like the ultimate goal for at least a good chunk of people. And now you're helping others do it. So I'm sure it's not all been roses and daisies along the way, and failure is a big part of that. So I'll bring us down a little. But
Well, I mean, well, I was just going to say, like, even this situation of there's going to be someone who's like, okay, I could see how I could use this. And then they're going to tell you a bunch of stuff and you're going to have to be like, all right, man, you might not want to hear this, but this is some realities that I don't think you're maybe aware of, right? Because I think one of the first steps for me in my late 20s where things really changed was awareness. And thankfully, I had individuals already in my life that were instigating kind of that thought process of maybe you're not as aware of yourself as you think you are, or maybe you're not as aware of why you feel the way you feel about, like the example of the job. I hate my job. Well, why do you hate the job? Right. And if you're just going there and saying, I hate my job, and you're not thinking that there's a way out. Right. So, like one thing that I think would be really interesting to talk to you about is having the understanding that you don't have to force yourself into a position and go, well, I'm committed to it no matter what, because with new information, we are adaptable creatures. Our brains, our bodies, they adapt. That's what they do. That's why we survive half the time, at least. And so part of that would be adapting with new information, right? So if I'm working at whatever, I don't want to like say anywhere and then they're like, how could you, right? If I'm working at XYZ and I don't enjoy, ringing up customers' products and like bagging it for them and they're going home, and I learned that about myself, why would I keep doing it, right? And sure, there's the one thing of I got to pay the bills, but I mean, think about how unique your position is. You know what I mean? And so it's like, we're not all going to be clarity coaches. I mean, I'm going to try really hard. But you know what I'm saying is if you can at least open your mind enough and become aware of like your potential, which is maybe really why everybody needs a clarity coach, is you can break out of whatever cycle you're in, whether it was inherited or the environment forced you into it. Hopefully that makes some sense.
Yeah, and what immediately came to mind as you were saying all of that is the sunk cost fallacy. Are you all familiar with that in any
No, but
no.
I am ready to be enlightened.
Please lay it on us. Yeah.
So I'm pretty sure it's like economics or business term, wherever the origin is, cite me later. But the premise of it is essentially saying that when you invest something into a thing, you're less likely to stop that investment because of what you've already put in. So for example, relationship, you use the job example. Let's do another one. Relationship. Sometimes you'll hear people say, I gave you the best years of my life. What do you mean you want to break up now? I can't walk away. Because to them, they've invested 5 years, 10 years, 2 weeks, whatever. So for them to stop at that moment would essentially render everything that came before worthless. So that comes up a lot of times where people are not ready to make a new decision with new information because of what they've already invested, whether it be time, energy, money, whatever the case is. Like I put all of this into this thing, so it has to work because the person I was when I made the investment can't look stupid, can't look dumb, and all of these things. And that really just robs you of the opportunity to actually do what you want to do. Like if you know it's not working, why consciously choose to do the thing that's not working moving forward? Like that's you choosing to waste more time, effort, energy, money, whatever the case may be. So that's really the tie-in that I'm hearing with what you just said is if you don't like bagging whatever you're bagging and checking people out in the checkout lane, it's okay to make a new decision. It doesn't mean that what you did before was worthless or a waste of your time. It means that you took the time and you're honoring yourself enough to be true and honest and giving yourself a chance to go towards whatever your happiness and fulfillment might look like at this point in time moving forward.
And I think that was a great way of explaining it. So just on I guess the topic of relationship, like I haven't thought about that way of explaining it, but there is also even if it's a short term, let's say it was a 1-year relationship, like you're still going to have to grieve that. But one thing that I think a lot of people, I feel like when I was younger, my mentality was, okay, if I'm leaving a relationship, right? It's, well, what about all the work we put in? Even though I wasn't aware of that's what it was, right? That investment mentality is what I'll call it. But the other part of it is what's wrong with me, and like something, this is all bad, there's nothing good that comes from it, because it ended up ending in the end. But it's like all of that experience still happened, and even if there's ups and downs, good
They're still
and
good.
bad
Yeah.
situations, it's a learning experience, right? And so I think as we get older, we can see that, where there's life experience, there's self experience, that it teaches you things if you allow it to, right? And I'm assuming that you probably have to like point that out to people, right? If they're, especially if they're looking for clarity of relationships and whatever.
Yeah, because it comes down to, well, what are you defining as success? Are you measuring the success of a relationship based on, the experiences you had within it, the way you were feeling, the way your partner or partners made you feel, and the things you were able to do and learn together? Or are you measuring it by how long it lasts? Because those are two very different metrics, and they're going to yield very different results when you're trying to measure up against them. So, when I speak about defining success and happiness for yourself, that's what it comes down to, is you're the only person who will be able to say at the end of the day whether or not something works out for you. And that's all based on how you choose to define what working out for you means, how you choose to define what being okay means. Can you say that regardless of whether or not this is a short-term thing, a long-term thing, or a forever thing, I will be okay at the end of it because I'm able to look back and see everything that came from it? That's what you need to figure out for yourself.
Yeah. And I
They don't
really
teach you
like,
this in school.
oh, they definitely don't. We are missing a few things, but I really like the point of, because at the end of any relationship, and it can even be a non-romantic, like just to open it up even more, if you have to cut someone out of your life because it's no longer healthy or serving you, um, it doesn't mean the whole thing was bad. Like, and they typically, I've seen, even in my experience, friends' experience, other, like, even in movies, they go automatically to like the whole thing was bad. This all was awful for you. Is that what you're saying? But when you're able to look at it like, no, it wasn't all bad, but at the end of the day, I have these wants and needs, or I've changed, or whatever the reason is, and I have to honor that regardless of the relationship. And it doesn't mean you're being selfish. It just means ultimately you spend your whole life with you, and you can't, screw yourself over and over again to mitigate pain for someone else. Is that a common thread that gets pulled a little bit?
Yeah, absolutely. And what comes to mind as you say that is, could you imagine how much more grace we would have collectively if we had that viewpoint, right? If we could say, me choosing to walk away from this thing is not an indicator or not an indictment on you and what you're able to provide or who you are as a person. It's a reflection of my changing needs and desires and capacity. And then on the flip side, knowing and trusting that when people choose to walk away from us, it's not an indictment or an indicator of our worth or value. It's just a reflection of their needs, wants, and changes. Don't know if that cut out, but I got it
Oh,
off.
you were good.
No, I think it is.
Their needs and wants and changes have changed in a way that we can no longer meet. That would release us from so much stress and pain and needing to decipher and explain away and justify. Y'all just live your life. Like, at the end of the day, we're on a floating rock. Half of the stuff is fake. So just do what you can while you can do it, and just allow yourself to have that grace and that compassionate curiosity as you move forward.
So I love that, because a lot of us don't allow ourselves to think that way, because it's like, well, that's selfish, or it's this, or it's that. Like I've had people say to me before of, and I get it, I'm kind of an unusual guy, right? Like I can be goofy and kind of weird, right? Like whatever. But I eventually realized that I started to take it as a compliment, because I didn't like what the normal was, where it was like, well, normally, whether, blah, 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 like this is how it's done, so that's how we're going to do it. And it's like, why? Like, we adapt. That is something I firmly believe in. So a big thing that changed for me is I had some individuals that I guess I'll say I had to move on from. There was a lot of toxicity, and one, I had to grieve the relationship, even though it was like, hey, I have to move on for myself, right? And again, to some people, it's like, hey, why are you being so selfish? I'm the only one that can really deal with the thing inside my head, right? Those thoughts and the feelings and the compassion towards myself. And I have to rely on that, or learn to rely on that. So what was really important to me is, as I moved on, I did have to grieve, I guess, the relationships, but the other part was not allowing some of the negativity that came from acknowledging things that were there that were very toxic, and still enjoy like the good memories. The memories didn't have to be tainted, is what I'm trying to say, right? And so I think it's great that I'm sure you've already, helped people, and you're probably going to help a lot of other people kind of be able to acknowledge that, because all of that led me to eventually going, stop taking everything personally. Most of this has nothing to do with you. And like, that kind of hurts, but you're like, it's like,
I guess that's better. Yeah.
there's an accuracy to that. Am I wrong? Of like, most of the time, people's emotions and reactions and projections have really nothing to do with you and everything to do with them. You know what I mean? Like, I get mad at someone and I'm like, oh, like back when I just allowed myself to blame things because it would make me feel better, right? Stop blaming things and start taking more responsibility. It was super uncomfortable. But I assume, I guess, you end up walking people into that confrontation of self, right?
Probably
Where
a
they have
lot.
to start going, well, it's like, hey man, like, you kind of got to take some responsibility for your emotions and acknowledging them and understanding them. And then it sounds like you provide the tool as well of, this is how you can understand it.
Yeah, in some degree. And I will say, by the time someone, wants to meet with me or have a conversation with me, they've already gotten to the point where they realize that it is them, right? They realize that they are the common denominator in every single thing that's gone right and every single thing that's gone wrong. Like, newsflash, if you're listening, you're like, whoa, what? Yeah, like, if you look at all the experiences, you are the only person who was there through all of them. So like, at some point you gotta, really look at yourself and figure out, what am I bringing to the situation? Of course, things notwithstanding, but it is what it is. So a lot of times folks are coming to me ready to have that conversation about, okay, now that I know this thing, what do I do to move forward? It's very different than to have someone force you to have a conversation. Like, that's why I left my last job, right? When I was meeting with students in student conduct, they didn't want to.
Yeah.
He told them that you need to meet with Miss Morris at 12 o'clock, right?
And they probably fought it, like, with every bit of their being.
Fiber, okay? But now people are opting into these conversations, and that's what's really so exciting about it, is more and more people are realizing that what you've had doesn't need to be what you have moving forward. Not to say that what you've had or what you are currently navigating is heinous. Sometimes you just want a little bit more. Sometimes you want something different, and giving yourself that permission to say, okay, if I keep thinking about this, if I keep having these questions, there's something there. So let me pull this string a little bit more and see how the ball unravels and what yarn is at the end of it.
Man.
Until the whole thing's on the floor, and then you got to put it back in.
Then you can refit it to whatever you want it to be.
Yeah.
Tapestry.
See,
Yeah.
look, you turn it around perfectly. And I'm sure a lot of the times you have to get people over the barrier of the negative, like them thinking this is all bad, or I failed at doing this. Why do I think I can go do this other thing? How do you normally approach that when they're stuck in that mindset?
By really encouraging them to be nice to be nice to yourself, be kind to yourself, right? Like, if you're approaching something from a space of, I'm all wrong, or I'm not enough, or I need to wait until this magical moment before I can deserve or earn this thing that I keep saying I want, this thing that's been on my heart for however long, this thing that keeps me up at night. That's not nice. like at the fundamental level. So I can't make you love yourself enough. I can't make you treat yourself with kindness. I can reflect back to you that I'm not quite sure if you heard yourself, but this is what I'm hearing you say. Is that actually what you mean? Right? Because if that's the case, that's a very different conversation. I don't care what job you want. I don't care what relationship you're looking for. If you don't believe that you get to have that, if you think that your life needs to be one of suffering until you earn some type of grace, like, you don't need a clarity coach. You need to sit down with the journal. I'll give you some prompts, and then we can meet again and then have a conversation about what action needs to take moving forward. So I think it's being kind to yourself.
I think that's something everyone needs to hear. And the strange part about it is there was a time in my life where people were saying that to me. Like, I needed to hear it. They knew I needed to hear it. They were saying it. Everybody was doing their job except for me, because I was stuck in this routine and I was stuck in this thought cycle. And, you know, if you keep ingesting the same thing over and over, whether it's mentally, physically, spiritually, you're not really going to get different results. And of course, you know, if you get to a point where you keep doing that over and over and you start expecting different results, isn't that basically you go crazy, right?
Yeah.
So what was really interesting to me is, you know, we all probably heard the phrase or a version of it where, you know, you take a horse to water, but you can't make it drink the water. And for a long time, I was the horse that wanted to be dragged to the water and then forced to drink the water. And it was like, that's not how it's going to work. Like, it just won't. And it's like, well, why not? And they're like, because if I try to make you drink the water, you're going to drown and then you're just dead. Like, no one wins there, buddy. And it's so wild because, you know, even the revelation that some people have of you are the common denominator and everything that's happened in your life, you are the one thing that was consistent, right? And I don't know, I just feel like you're probably like clarity coach / like truth dropper. Like, you're just dropping truth on people and they're like, oh my God. Because the other thing too is that you already kind of made a point, and I've been trying to wrap my head around it, of the people that are coming to you have started to recognize things and they're like, hey, I need a little bit of help with this, or maybe I have the pieces but I don't know how to put them together. And so is there any kind of advice that you can have for people who, like, for instance, I was the horse that needed to be dragged to the water and then needed to figure out to drink it, right? Made it past that. But then once you recognize that about yourself, you'll see it in other people. Again, you have the understanding that you can't make them drink the water, or, you know, change, even if they're like asking for it, they have to do it. I mean, what would your advice be to people? Like, hey, I'm watching this person go through this thing. I want to help them, but they have to want to help themselves. So what's my option?
Yeah. So two things immediately come to mind, right? Like, nothing changes until something changes. And eventually you're going to get sick of your own shit. That is where the most change comes from, right? I started going to the gym regularly, started doing my little yoga when I was tired of my back and my knee hurting, right? A horse is going to eventually drink the water when it's thirsty. So realizing that you can't make anyone do anything. You can support them. You can, you know, serve as an example. You can give them suggestions and show them what's possible. But at the end of the day, it is not your responsibility to make anyone do anything, nor is it within your power to make anyone do anything. And I think a lot of times, you know, when you are a caring person, when you see people struggling, you can see it and you just want to like shake them so that they can see it as well. But that is not the best use of your time, effort, and energy. You're just going to be frustrated, resentment might grow, and you're neglecting yourself in pursuit of this other thing. So for folks who are watching people, you know, navigating things in ways that they would do differently, I would just tell you to mind your business, right? Like, and most succinctly, mind your business and focus on yourself. And what can you do to show them what's possible? What can you do to be there to support them? Because you also don't know everything, right? We think that we know, but we actually have no idea. It's like the diary. You remember MTV Diaries back in the day?
Oh my gosh, yes.
That's what
I heard of it. I never saw it. So.
Oh man, what a great docuseries. But anyway, like, even, you know, how many people turn around and say, like, I have no idea who you are. I, you know, laid in bed next to you for years. I worked beside you for decades. And there's still these layers that we have no insight into. So rather than trying to force someone to do something, just give them the space to figure it out, because eventually they will get tired of their own shit and they're going to need a support system to help them. You can choose to be that support system, or you can remove yourself from the equation by trying to force them into something and then actually ruin a relationship that you say you're trying to advance.
Yeah.
Well, one, I never thought about that of like, well, think about it, man. The horse eventually gets thirsty. And I was like, that's what happened to me. I was just thirsty, right?
I was so thirsty.
But the other thing is I've had to really deal with a part of myself that does have, I guess I would say, an insatiable need to have control. And as I identified it, I realized that having control of anything other than yourself, so meaning, my environment and the people in that environment, I can kind of control. I can decide who's coming in, who's coming out, but even then you don't know what strangers you're going to interact with. The only thing I can really control would be the way I receive things, right? Like my reaction or my decision to observe instead of react at all, if I had that kind of control of my emotions. But otherwise, I mean, there's these job titles that we end up with, right? Like, I'm the manager's manager. Like, I have power and control. And it's like, some crazy person comes in here and burns the whole thing to the ground. I don't know how much control you had to stop that, right? Like, there's this weird illusion out there of there is an importance for ranking, but titles don't really give you
security. Yeah.
Like power and control, or you have no idea what people are going to do for whatever reason. I thought that was a good point. It's all an illusion. Wow. End podcast, guys. Good job. No.
Well, I wanted to go back to the point that Sam made way long ago, but comparing truth to clarity, I feel like in a way you're helping people find their truth, and that's the same as clarity. Does that sound right? Or
yeah, I refer to it as like the capital T truth of like, we're all told these things, right? We're told that when you get a certain job title, that gives you a certain amount of security. We all know that that's not true, because if we look at the last couple of years, there's a lot of people who had certain jobs that they thought was going to be their safety net. There's a lot of structures that we bought into collectively as a society that we thought was designed to protect us or keep us safe or whatever the case is. And we see that that's not true. And it's a matter of realizing, okay, there's a place for all of this. And within this, what actually is true for me? Like, how do I choose to engage with this? What type of weight do I choose to give to this thing over my life and into my life and around my life? So yeah, it's a mix of both. And the clarity helps you identify the truth, and then the truth helps you figure out what your metric of clarity is. So it's a never-ending circle.
Yeah, I'll use the eyebrow analogy, where they're not sisters or twins, they're cousins. So you're close, but not really the same thing.
I find it wild how perfect this conversation is like happening for me, where I started to think about, let's call it the capital T truth of like, who am I? Like, I started reading books, I guess, listening to books, and some of those books, because I eventually got stuck on the concept, and I still think it's a good tool in terms of trying to have some sort of compass, because I haven't met a clarity coach yet, but here we are. So in my brain, I was like, what's important? And that would be, mind, body, and soul, like spirituality, right? And so one of the things that I was doing was trying to read books about the mind and trying to figure out parts of me that I neglected, or maybe I was just subconsciously afraid to approach, right? So I'm reading these books and I'm finding the right ones, and things are starting to click. And identity was a really interesting thing, because it would talk about how, so I'm not really a sports fan. I'm not anti-sports. It's something I haven't invested in, right? So they would talk about how, let's go with Texas. So Dallas Cowboys is a football team in Texas, and people, diehard fan. Their grandpappy did it. Their dad did it. They're doing it. Everybody's been doing it. They're going to do it till they die, right? That's a part of their identity. So when the Cowboys lose a game, they're like, oh, this whole day is like horrible. Like, we failed, we lost. Like, they identify with losing that game, even though it was like, dude, that was just entertainment. But they identified with it. So easy for me to be like, wow, that's silly. Like, you're upset because the team lost because you feel like you lost. But then as soon as you apply it to something I identify with, the light bulb comes on. I'm like, it's not so silly after all, is it? I go to do like a PR deadlift and I fail at it. People will be like, hey, it's not a big deal. Like, you were trying to pick up a lot of weight. It's kind of crazy that you're trying to even do that. Why are you doing that? Because I identify with the gym. I identify with that growth, right? So even though I'm in my early 30s, all of a sudden I had to confront myself about, I don't really know who I am, because I've just been bending myself to fit in the situations that I'm stumbling upon, whether it's a workplace, family, relationships, whatever it is. Where do you begin if you go, hey, I don't know who I am?
Mm-hmm. So I actually have a lovely course on this called Life by Design. And I essentially walk you through this question, right? Because you're right. A lot of us don't know who we are outside of who people have told us to be or who we are, right? I mean, logically, biologically, it makes sense. When we're little, we need people to tell us what to do. So a lot of us are imprinted by our family, our society, our community, our church, if we have a religious upbringing. And then we get into the real world and we have no idea what to do outside of those labels and those roles we've played. So this is something in my higher ed upbringing, the process of self-actualization, right? There's an entire theory, student development theory about it, but the summary is, after a while, you start identifying where you find your sense of self, who you look to tell you what's right and wrong, how you start, developing some sort of moral compass, who you start looking to be on authority. And a lot of people don't move beyond the first two levels where we look outside of ourselves to figure that out, right? We're looking at our parents, we're looking at our partners, we're looking at our friends, we're looking at our bosses. And it's because it's hard. It's hard to sit down and say, okay, I know you told me that as the eldest daughter, I should be the one who manages everyone's expectations and shoulders all the burdens. If you watched Encanto, Under Pressure is one of my favorite tracks.
Yep.
It's so much better than that Bruno song, but it speaks
Bruno
so
was easy for everyone to get stuck on. Yeah.
Yeah. But it speaks to this entire notion of, you shoulder all these things because that's all you've ever known. So for you to sit there and say, you know what, I don't want to hold this anymore. This is actually hard for me. That forces you to, question, well, why did these people put these roles on me? Was it for their benefit or was it for mine? So it's an entire existential crisis that you go through.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it really comes down to, one, recognizing that it's a question you're allowed to ask, and then two, allowing yourself to answer it honestly, and then three, trusting the answer when you find it and allowing that answer to change over time.
So it immediately instigated the thought, obviously, I am the man of 1,000 questions, but so like, you start to figure out your truth, right? And so let's use religion.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not a religious person. I'm not saying there is or isn't a God. I never stuck to a religion, but I've known people who, they were raised, I'm not going to pick one. They were raised in a religion, and then they got to a point where they were able to figure out their truth was, I don't identify with this, and I don't necessarily agree with it. I'm not saying it's wrong, but I'm saying it's not for me.
Right.
But then it's the whole thing of, okay, I figured out that's my truth, but I don't want to tell, mom, dad, grandma, brother, cousin Sally. Like, I don't want to tell my friends who are religious, because one, I don't want them to go, oh, you're not one of us. Mm-hmm. Right. It's natural for us to do that. Like, mm-hmm. if you take the time and you figure out what your truth is, that doesn't mean you have to go into your job and like, F you, Barbara, and screw you, Steve, and like, right, like, I figured out my truth, I don't like you, or I hate this job. You don't.
Yeah, you've already done that once. You can't do it again.
Yeah, you're cool, right? But so that seems like a weird situation that's inevitably going to happen when you start seeking the truth of self, and then how to react, because at what point does it start to feel like, well, now I'm not being true to myself because I have to withhold my truth so I can get a paycheck, I can maintain family relationships or whatever, right?
Yeah. And I mean, that's it right there. It's balancing all of these things. And I speak about this sometimes, and there's this whole notion of work-life balance. And I'm using that because you talked about Barbara and Steve. It's always Barbara and Steve. Sorry for the Barbaras and Steves who are listening. But we have this idea of work-life balance. And essentially what that is assuming or suggesting is that work is one part of your existence, and then life is everything else. That makes no sense. You're so much more than a job title and then everything else. And I speak about in the course I mentioned, like the 11 areas of your life that intersect, right? So some of it is your caretaking relationships. Some of it is your romantic relationships, your financial wellness and well-being, and all of these different things. And they all intersect with each other. So to your question and the example you just gave, if you're realizing that there's an area of your life that no longer applies, or an area of your life that you want to navigate differently, it's going to impact everything else, right? Because you are one person, wherever you go, that's where you are. That doesn't mean you need to broadcast it, right? Like I just finished Bridgerton in 2 days after waiting 2 years. That doesn't mean I'm going to take that information with me into the gym, right? That doesn't mean I'm going to take that information with me to work. So it's just about, recognizing that that's part of you and knowing when you want to share it, because time and place matters. And then also knowing that you don't really need anyone else's approval, right? If you are so concerned about other people not accepting it or other people not agreeing with it, you can make the choice to either not disclose it at all, disclose it and give them the space to remove themselves from your life, or disclose it and give them the space to get on board with it. Those are your 3 options. And then other options, trickle down from there. But it's a matter of choosing, again, how do I want this truth to manifest itself in my life? And what am I willing to sacrifice, right? Am I willing to sacrifice my happiness for someone else's comfort? Or am I going to have that difficult conversation when and if it arises?
That one hits.
I recently had, I guess, an acknowledgement. Funny enough, I kind of started to segue away from Facebook a long time ago, because it was this weird thing where it just turned into, it was a bunch of spoilers about whatever current TV show, or like maybe a political rant, or it was like, I don't know, weird stuff where like people were just like putting their thoughts, and I was just like, hey, that's cool, you can think whatever you want to think. But on Instagram, I found out really quickly that I could follow things like weird hashtags that I didn't at the time seem to apply to Facebook, where it was like positive thinking and just looking at art, or motivational quotes. And so my Instagram feed was always these things that were kind of sending what felt like positivity, right? One thing that recently popped up, I think I was just playing around on Instagram, was talking about how a lot of us, and it resonated with me, which is why I'm bringing it up, we get this weird notion from somewhere, somehow, I blame Hollywood, I guess, that we have to kill I guess one term I've heard is like the shadow self, right? You have to kill that. You got to get rid of it. It's bad. Get rid of the bad. Stuff it deep down inside or something, right? And then let the good stuff come to the surface and just pay attention to that. And it was like, how insane is that? You're gonna create a severe duality, lock part of it into a deep dark hole, and it's just gonna fester and ferment,
get really
and probably
bad. Yeah.
It's gonna get real bad. And when it gets strong enough, it's gonna overtake the positive side anyway, right?
Yes.
It was like, these things are meant to coexist. You need to understand both the good and the bad. Like, you're not gonna be perfect. You probably shouldn't want to be perfect, because it's okay to strive for perfection, as long as you are fully aware that it's unattainable, right?
Yes.
Secret of life, people. Perfection is unattainable. I solved it.
You're gonna make me quote Harry Potter, and like I've been very good at not doing that in this podcast. But when Sirius Black is talking to Harry, he goes, "The world and people aren't just Death Eaters and good wizards. It's not one or the other." And it applies to like yourself too. This is not Sirius talking. This is me. But like, it's not. And Sam and I have had a lot of conversations like that. Everything. A lot of people want it to just be black and white, like this very clear newspaper print. This is your answer, or this is what I am, like on a page right here. But everything's a sliding scale. It's going back and forth. Maybe you don't move much and you're just over on this side a little bit, but you're changing. Change is the only constant. And you have to, like you said, you can express as much of that as you want, But you don't have to go on Facebook and write a novel and be like, well, Barbara and Steve are evil and I hate them. And I don't care if I get fired for this stupid post.
Hashtag this is my truth, right?
And then like tag your company.
Yeah, if you choose to do that, be okay with the consequences of that, right? And this brings me back to, this is like 80% of the conversations I would have with students, because I used to work at one of the universities I worked at was like top tier university, like straight A students, like future senators and Supreme Court justices, that league. And they would come in, you know, after we get a report, we need to meet with them about whatever incident happened, alleged policy violation. And I go over, you know, the report we received. And I would say 80% of the time it was, you know, I have no idea what happened. This is not me. I'm such a good student. I'm a student leader. I've done all these things. And I would have to like remind them or enlighten them to the fact that, but it was you, right? And what you're seeing is who you have the capacity to be. You are now seeing the types of decisions that you can make. You're seeing the types of actions you can take. You're seeing the options that you neglect, and use this as an opportunity to show you what you no longer want. Because if you don't want to feel this way ever again, if you don't want to have to talk to some random lady ever again about what happened a few nights ago, then now you know, and you can make different decisions moving forward. But this urge that we have to, again, compartmentalize and like put things in a box when we don't like how it works out, of like, oh, well, that doesn't count, or, you know, it wasn't me. You're the only constant in all of your experiences. So now you know who you have the capacity to be. And if you don't like that, then don't do it again. Make a different choice moving forward. And if you do like it, then continue forward in the way that works for you.
Oh yeah. You're speaking my language. I'm sure there's people listening and they're probably having a moment where they're starting to ponder things, right? And like that's great. That's part of why we enjoy this podcast. I mean, selfishly, it's because I get to meet people every week, and I love that.
There it is.
But you know, yeah, full, you know, truth, right? I think it's interesting because I've had times where, oh, hey, like just excuse that part of me because I was stressed out of my mind, and like I try to validate whatever or defend myself, and slowly but surely over time, as my desire to find a neutral space, because you know, like, okay, so people drink and everyone knows, or anyone paying attention knows that it's a depressant, and so like maybe you'll feel a little like happy at first, but it's eventually going to turn south if you let it, and it's just accenting maybe things that you've stuffed deep down inside, or whatever it is, right? And I'm sure that applies with other things as well, but this isn't like a dare program or anything. So you know, it's interesting because when you start going down this path, there are things that you'll be confronted with that are going to be super duper uncomfortable, and you're going to probably have, I'm speaking, I guess, from my experience thus far, because it's still pretty new for me, maybe like a year or two, where things are going to get really weird, because either you're going to have these pockets of time where you have a lot of expansion, a lot of conscious growth, like consciousness growth, you know, physical growth, just financial growth, whatever it is that you're applying yourself to and achieving. And then you're going to have the opportunity, because I guarantee you, if I went from making $30,000 a year for 5 years, and then all of a sudden there's a year where I make $1 million and I keep doing that, I am going to change, because money will accent what's already there, right? Whenever it gets to a point where a person asks you, okay, hey, like, how do you help people? You explain it and they go, okay, can you help me with this? And then you start helping them with it and they start to reject it. Do you just have to point out, hey, it's okay that you're feeling the way you're feeling? Because a lot of this is about acceptance, and then giving yourself time to, I guess, process, right? I mean, you wouldn't just be like, wham, there you go, and then accept it, right?
Yeah, I mean, I say this lovingly with, you know, as much care and concern as possible, but like, I don't care. I don't care about your outcome, right? I am just some random lady speaking with you. You are the person who has to live with yourself on either side of this. So my role isn't to force anyone to make any changes. My role isn't to convince anyone of anything. you chose to come to me. You chose to log into the Zoom. I give you many reminders so you can forget them at any point, right? So there's a reason that you initiated this interaction, you logged in to have our conversation today, you haven't hung up the Zoom yet, you haven't left the room. So there's some small part of you that actually wants this. So it's up to you to decide, what is it that you want and how bad do you want it? Because again, when we leave this room together, you're stuck with yourself, right? And again, eventually you're gonna get thirsty. Eventually you're gonna get tired of your shit. So of course there are people, I know of a few clients who, I give them, we go through all the motions, we have the conversation, and then they don't do the thing. I can't control you. All I can do is serve as a reminder of, okay, what is it that you want from this experience? What brought you here? And what are you hoping the end result will look like? Because eventually we're all gonna die. So you can either die knowing that you had the capacity and you actively chose not to, or you can die knowing that at least you did all you could while you could. And those are two very different ways to go out.
Yes.
In a weird way, that's really comforting for me, because I say that a lot and people are like, dude, a lot of people just go, he was in the Marine Corps, so that's where he's all messed up. And I'm like, I'm not going to deny anything, but at the same time, that was something that I found a lot of comfort in when I acknowledged it. Whenever I acknowledged it, that was like the only two things that I knew were for sure. Is like, I was born.
Yes.
Well, this is where like my mom calls me and it's like, hey, you were a test tube baby. No. It's like, I knew that I was born and I knew I was going to die. And so I didn't have to take everything else so seriously, because you already kind of have the ending of the book, but there's still enough mystery that, there's wonder and excitement, right? Because you are right. I love that. You're like, look, dude, like, I'm here to help, but you've got to do the thing. You have to live with yourself, whatever. And it's weird because like, I wouldn't say you're being blunt. You're just like, it's literally just honesty. Hey man,
it's your whole job to be like this. Yeah. I have an unbiased opinion telling you, what you wanted to hear.
Right. And a lot of times I don't say anything that people don't know, right? It's just sometimes the things they don't want to acknowledge or the things they want to ignore, because it's very easy to assume that we will have a tomorrow, right? And I think because I've dealt so personally, like I lost my father when I was in college, like I've lost my grandmother in the last couple of years, like these stark reminders of like, we only have so much time. And like, sure, you can look at it as like a morbid thing, or you can look at it as a gift. Like, you mean to tell me that if I wake up tomorrow, I get to do this all over again? I get to make a new choice? When people talk about, I don't like getting older, I don't like birthdays, you do realize the alternative. I love birthdays. What a gift it is to be able to say, you know what? I get to do another lap around the sun. I get to have several more lunar cycles where I can figure this thing out. And I think it's a perspective that, yes, it can be like real stark and like, dark and gloomy, or it can just be a reminder. It could be a celebration of, you get to do anything you want to do. Really, we have the internet. Financial health outcomes are comparably better than they were before. Like, yes, there's going to be strife and struggle, but like, let's think about it for a second. So with that, you can either stay in a situation that is no longer serving you just to say that you made it through, or you can take the steps are going to help propel you forward in the way you want to go. That's really, it's very simple. So like,
it
at
is,
that point,
yeah.
It's a shift of perspective, yeah.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
I was just gonna say, it's a lot mindset, but it's also like you were saying, some people already know this, but they don't want it. They're like, nope, I'm not, like, you can't make me do it yet. I know you're 100% right, but I don't want to. And it's do you ever refer to it as like taking a leap, or like even just that tiny first step? And then they go, oh, it's not so bad. I didn't die. I'm all right.
Yeah, like just break it up into little chunks. No one is saying that you need to quit your job tomorrow. I recognize that that's not fiscally responsible for some people. You've got dependents, you've got obligations, sure. But in the meantime, what are you going to do? Because it takes the same amount of energy to complain as it does to do something that you want to do. and recognizing that your job doesn't need to fulfill all parts of your life. What are you doing outside of work? Do you have hobbies? Do you have friends? Let's figure out what that can look like together. I think it's, again, that mindset shift, that perspective shift of like, you don't need to live your life complaining. You don't need to live your life struggling. That is not a badge of honor. There's no oppression Olympics. Of course, there are things that suck and are heinous and are quite shitty, right? That's going to exist. So why add on to that willingly, right? When we talk about control of the things you can control, why opt into your own struggle?
Yeah. And you can acknowledge your struggle, but also move on. Like a lot of people feel like, I know many people who are stuck in that. Like something horrible happened 20 years ago. They're still in that stage of this horrible thing happened to me. And for me, I've gone through loss and all of that as well too. That happened to me. And then I was like, I need to do something because this is not a place to live. And you start to open up and move forward. Yeah.
It's interesting. We've kind of talked about it on here, and of course, like Megan and I know each other. It's only been like 5 years or something, but just a measly 5 years, whatever. Like I've lost people, and each time it created different things. And as you get older and as you grow, you learn to grieve differently, or whatever. And with one of the big ones that happened to me, it was like a year and a half ago. It shifted how I felt about death, how I felt about dying, how I thought about other people that had died in my life. It was insane to me. And it felt really negative and unfair. But then it slowly shifted into, okay, well, this is your opportunity to go take it for what it is, and then decide what effect it's going to have on your life, right? Like, what direction are you going to allow it to take you? Thankfully, I can say that it took me in the direction that I wanted it to, because I think I mindfully made that choice during the grieving process, right? But I talked to my friend today while we were working out, and we talked about how it's so wild that, the initial response that I had when my friend passed away, I mean, it like knocked me out of my like routine, like completely and utterly. I didn't care about my job. I didn't care about people. I didn't care about myself. It was all over. It felt like the world ended, right? It's part of grief. And it kept me in this different mindset for quite a while. But then thankfully I was aware enough, but you start to notice that you just start going right back into the routine and back into the old way of thinking. And if you aren't paying attention, you'll just slip right back to where you probably were before, where it just, you take it for granted, I guess would be the right way. And we were talking about how there are individuals that got diagnosed with terminal cancer, and everyone around them is like, oh God, how could this happen? This is the worst thing ever. I'm so sorry for you and your family. And the person with terminal cancer is like, well, one, I'm the one that's about to die. And two, I have never been so free to live my life ever before. Mm-hmm. And then, it instigated this conversation of, there are people who they've had cancer before and it's changed their life forever, where they were like, I never went back, because all of a sudden they saw I can't take it for granted. But then there's other people, and not that it's right or wrong, they had cancer. It was like, oh my God, I'm going to die. They were forced to face their mortality, but slowly but surely they just got stuck back into the cycle, right? Day in and day out of the routine. And then before you know it, you're not thinking about it, right? And so again, I guess I use the words taking for granted, but it doesn't have to necessarily be that. I guess I don't really have a point to all that, other than it's easy to have like the ups and downs, right? Where you're paying attention to it and then you stop, or it's important to you and it goes away. And so that's where I think part of it is a forever thing, because as much as you want to be due diligence all the time, we get tired.
Yeah.
We get distracted.
And I think that, it's very easy to like stock up on every self-development podcast and book and like know your Enneagram and your Myers-Briggs and all these things. I know all of those things, but it gets to a point where you treat yourself like a HGTV renovation, right?
A fixer-upper. Yeah.
Self-improve and like fix yourself. And that's coming from a place of thinking you're broken. right? Thinking that there's something to solve, something to improve constantly. Like, of course, there's development and changes in the ebb and flow, like you just mentioned. But at some point, you just got to stop and just settle, right? Just stop and observe what's going on, figure out, okay, what is currently happening in my situation, in my context? What do I want to keep? What do I want to remove? What do I want to add? Then let that settle for a little bit and just live your life, right? Because if you're constantly trying to figure out this next big thing, or you're constantly in fear of like, I could get hit by a bus any moment, you're not actually living, right? You're just like a shell of a person navigating the world, but not actually taking in any of the things that you're coming into contact with. So I think it's that delicate balance of figuring out, how long will I allow myself to be in this funk, right?
Yeah.
How long will I allow myself to be in front of the water and not take a sip? And is that actually helpful to me?
The answer, it was a really long time. Decades, I don't know, years, millennium, I don't know.
No.
It happens though, right?
Yeah, there are some people who, like you said, 20 years ago, something happened. And this is not to, again, villainize anyone. If that is how you're choosing to deal with it, if that is the only way you can deal with it, that is how you're dealing with it. I just want you to know, if there's a point you realize, you know what, I might want to try something different, or I could do something different. Allow yourself to do something different, right? As opposed to holding on to the label of the person who never let go of it. It's like, in the movies where the high school quarterback goes back and just always talks about the game-winning throw or whatever they do.
Yeah.
That's always what I
in
think
high
about.
school. Yeah.
Yeah, it's like you keep reliving that one game senior year. Meanwhile, you've had all these other opportunities in front of you, but you haven't been able to see them because you've actively chosen to ignore.
Yeah.
Hmm.
Yeah.
I'm also glad I did not peak in high school. I was not cool. I did not know what I was.
So I did have a moment where I acknowledged that I became terrified that I had peaked by going into the Marines and having this, like, I had a really, it's a weird experience, right? Because it's like a very unusual job, but I had some really cool things happen. Like I climbed Mount Fuji and I saw Tokyo. I got to go to places I never would have gotten to go to if I didn't join, right? And so these were like very epic things to me. And I got out and all of it just stopped. And it was like, oh, I'm back in my hometown and I'm going to school kind of and working a job that's never going to be a career. And so all I wanted to talk about was like, I went to Tokyo one time. And like I think again, it was just this fear of like, oh my God, I peaked and I was like 25 years old. Like it's all over from here. I plan on living to be at least 250. I don't. So really quick, I did want to say a couple of things that you kind of touched on. Maybe you agree, and if you don't, definitely clarify. But I do think that something that really changed for me, and I just stuck with it, was there weren't really any rules. They're all made up, but there are consequences. That is the truth. You don't have to follow any rules. You can do whatever you want, but you will have to pay a consequence. And sometimes the consequence is great. Like you take a leap of faith and it pays off. Like, great. That's all I'm saying. Like, guys, there's no rules. Just understand there are consequences. Cause and effect. Okay, it's real.
There are big consequences, so don't blame us if you go streaking through the quad or whatever.
Yeah.
No,
it's not going to be
so real. Yeah. And a lot of times people don't want to make decisions because they don't know if they can handle the consequences, right? They're not quite sure what's on the other side of it. And it comes down to you can do anything you want to do. You don't have to pay taxes. You don't have to follow the speed limit. You don't have to do any of these things. Just know that there is going to be an effect from the cause you put out. And it's up to you to decide if that's something you want to navigate. Just don't be mad or surprised when it happens.
Yeah.
You can anticipate. The second thing is, I guess the way I said that was kind of weird. First thing was, I just wanted to get my 2 cents in. The second thing was, even though you've dropped a lot of knowledge or things to consider, I'll say it that way, this is the part of the podcast where I love to put the spotlight on you, even more so than we already have, of like, hey, do you have a piece of advice that you think everyone should hear? Or just something that maybe everyone should try to think about, like ponder on?
Yeah, I would say in light of this conversation that we've had is really just to give yourself permission to try, right? Give yourself permission to be. A lot of times we look to other people to give us the okay to do things or move forward or try things out, when in reality, just give yourself the permission. I liken it to like, we're not in elementary school. We don't need permission slips to go on the field trip. Life is a field trip, right? Just give yourself
Mm-hmm.
permission to figure it out. And I mean that in terms of, saying no, saying yes, pivoting, changing your mind over and over and over again until you can no longer change your mind. Because like we talked about a little bit a while ago, you're dead, right? So every time you're alive, that's another chance to figure it out. So just give yourself permission to do that and be kind to yourself as you do it. I know we touched on this a little bit earlier as well. Give yourself that grace, give yourself that, compassionate curiosity to figure out, okay, why am I reacting this way? What's going on in this space? What could I do differently next time? What do I want to keep the same? So that's really the summary. Be kind and give yourself permission.
Bravo. I would tell you that I think I want to put a placeholder on our conversation, because I'll say if and when, or if or when you come back, I think the placeholder should be, okay, so like, what do you know about enlightenment? And what do you think happens if we do all this work now and we are able to maintain consciousness? What benefits can we have on the other side?
He's gonna expect you to be like a philosopher, basically, to like talk him through.
Well, what's crazy is I mean, obviously you're already extremely intelligent, but I could just picture you like reading up and being like, all right, I'm ready. And then I'm going to show up and be like, yeah, I'm not actually sure what enlightenment means. I was just like, it was a talking point. I mean, right. I do appreciate that. I've really loved this conversation. Hopefully everyone listening was able to, I mean, there had to at least be one nugget of value that you were able to pull from
If
this
not,
to just at least think about, right?
They don't want to drink the water. That's on them.
Don't worry, you'll get thirsty, right? Yeah, that's right. With that all being said, we have to go over to Megan's corner as we wrap up things.
Welcome to Megan's corner. I can't follow any of that conversation though, so don't expect much. Just bring those expectations way down here. I'll help transition you back into your day with this little corner. But
you have to go into like car salesman and be like, we got Facebook, we got, right?
You're better at that than I am, though. That's
that's fair. I have this weird radio voice and everything.
You could definitely pitch it. I'm just gonna, in very docile like tones, say that we're on social media. You can find us at Friends of Failure, though, on pretty much anything. If you're listening to us, we're on YouTube if you want to see our lovely faces. And one of our favorite parts, you can email us. Eventually, we'll have to shut that off when you guys abuse it, but for now, you can email us at friendsoffailurepodcast@gmail.com. And we really just ask for stories of failure. It can be your own, someone else's if you have permission and consent. It can be anonymous. You could probably make it up and we wouldn't know until it like got pretty obvious. And then Diana's going to be linked wherever you're listening and viewing this, and you can find all her amazing coaching and maybe get some clarity or some truth to what you're doing if you're really confused right about now.
So I guess spoiler alert, obviously the like Instagram and all that stuff's going to be there, but you have like a website, right? Like if somebody was like, hey, I want to be, I guess I'm going to use the word client.
Yes. Yeah.
That's how they would do it, right? They would go to your website.
Yes, I do have a website. All my information is there. You can learn about my online courses. You can learn about working with me one-on-one. So come on over to the World Wide Web where I live.
Perfect. I am the internet. Oh, wow. This is going to be great for the enlightenment conversation in the future.
Oh my gosh.
And one more thing, if you're listening to this, look, you don't even have to share a story that we end up talking about. Like, just engage conversation with us. I want to talk to the people that are listening. I want to talk to more strangers. That's why I love this podcast. I want to talk to people I don't know. I love it. So
and then our inbox implodes with like 2,000 messages, and I have to like change our email.
Now that I've been given permission to go ahead and say everything, I've been wanting to say this since 3rd grade, right? Awesome. Well, hey, again, thanks for having the conversation with us today. Super awesome. Everyone listening, thank you for your time. Definitely give us your input. And of course, as usual, hopefully it's going to be like this until the day I die. I want to remind everyone the final thought, which is life is happening for you, not to you. So go do something. Like, give yourself permission to try.
Drink the water. Don't drink the Kool-Aid, but drink the water.
Drink the water.
If it's not I'm stronger than you, it's I'm wiser than you, I'm more loving than you, I'm more tolerant than you, I'm more sophisticated than you. It doesn't matter what it is, but this constant competition is going on. This is the secret. This is the secret. You can't make a mistake.